Chicken feed prices are climbing faster than many small farmers can handle. Every month, another bag costs more. Every season, profits shrink a little further. And for many backyard chicken owners, the dream of raising self-sufficient flocks is slowly turning into an expensive struggle. Some farmers have already reached the point where feeding their chickens costs almost as much as the eggs and meat they produce. Others are watching their savings disappear into commercial feed that never seems to last long enough. But while most people continue depending completely on store-bought feed, a different group of farmers has been quietly building something else entirely. Instead of constantly buying more grain, they are creating systems that grow food almost endlessly, systems that regenerate, systems that multiply, systems that turn water, sunlight, scraps, and simple plants into powerful nutrition for chickens. And the strange part is that many of these systems are not new at all. Some have existed for generations. Some were used long before modern feed companies dominated farming. Yet today, most chicken owners barely know they exist. There are 4 systems in particular that are changing how small farmers think about poultry feed forever. One grows so fast it can double in days. Another creates thick mats of fresh green feed from simple grains. One ancient aquatic plant is now being called green gold by homesteaders around the world. And the final system turns waste itself into live protein that chickens attack with almost unbelievable excitement. By the end of this video, you will understand why so many farmers are trying to reduce chicken feed costs by building systems that feed themselves. And once you see how these setups work together, you may never look at commercial chicken feed the same way again. For decades, commercial feed became the center of poultry farming. Farmers depended on bags of processed grain mixtures designed to maximize growth and egg production. And for a long time, it worked. Feed was relatively affordable. Supply chains were stable. Grain prices remained manageable. But over the years, things began changing. Weather disruptions started affecting harvests. Transportation costs increased. Global grain demand exploded, and suddenly, many small farms found themselves trapped inside a system they could no longer fully afford. Every increase in feed prices cut deeper into profits. Every shortage created panic. And many backyard chicken owners realized something uncomfortable. Their birds had become completely dependent on a supply chain they could not control. But chickens themselves were never designed to survive only on pellets poured from a bag. Long before commercial poultry systems existed, chickens spent their days searching for food naturally. They scratched through soil hunting insects. They pecked at greens. They searched for seeds, worms, larvae, and aquatic plants. Their instincts were built around movement and foraging. Even today, when chickens are released into open spaces, they immediately begin hunting for natural food sources. That natural behavior is exactly what many homesteaders are rediscovering now. Instead of relying entirely on processed feed, farmers are beginning to combine natural chicken feed systems with modern efficiency. And the first system starts with something most people would never imagine feeding to chickens. At first glance, it does not even look useful. In fact, many people mistake it for pond waste, a bright green layer floating quietly on still water. Duckweed, tiny, simple, almost invisible from a distance. Yet, this floating aquatic plant may be one of the most overlooked chicken feed alternatives in modern farming. In some conditions, duckweed grows at shocking speed. Under warm temperatures and nutrient-rich water, it can multiply rapidly, covering entire pond surfaces in a matter of days. And while it may look insignificant, duckweed contains surprisingly high protein levels that make it valuable for poultry nutrition. For some farmers, duckweed farming has become one of the easiest ways to produce continuous green feed with minimal space. The reason this system attracts so much attention is simple. Unlike traditional crops, duckweed does not require large fields, expensive equipment, or complicated infrastructure. A small pond, container, or lined water system can produce a constant supply when managed correctly. And chickens absolutely love it. The moment fresh duckweed is tossed into a flock, the reaction is immediate. Birds rush toward aggressively, pecking through the floating greens with intense focus. Some farmers describe it as a feeding frenzy unlike anything they see with ordinary feed. But the real power of duckweed is not just excitement. It is sustainability. Because once established, duckweed keeps growing. Harvested portions regenerate quickly. Sunlight fuels new growth. Nutrients recycle through the water, instead of repeatedly purchasing feed inputs. Farmers begin maintaining a living feed source that continuously replaces itself. For homestead chickens, this can become a major advantage. Imagine walking into your backyard each morning and harvesting fresh poultry feed directly from a pond instead of opening another expensive bag from the store. That shift alone changes the psychology of farming completely. Suddenly, food production starts happening inside the farm itself. And for many off-grid homestead farmers, that level of self-reliance is becoming increasingly important. But there's something many beginners misunderstand about duckweed systems. They assume duckweed can survive in any water. That mistake destroys countless setups before they ever succeed. Healthy duckweed farming depends heavily on water quality. Dirty or contaminated water can quickly create problems. Poor nutrient balance slows growth. Stagnant conditions may attract disease. And if the water becomes toxic, the entire system can collapse surprisingly fast. Smart farmers pay close attention to cleanliness and nutrient cycling. Some integrate fish systems. Others use carefully managed compost tea. Some even rotate water sources to maintain healthier growth. Because while duckweed can grow aggressively, successful systems still require management. One backyard farmer discovered this lesson the hard way after trying to grow duckweed in an old neglected container behind his coop. At first, growth exploded. Thick green layers covered the surface within days. Excited by the rapid growth, he began feeding it heavily to his chickens. Then suddenly, production stopped. The water became foul. The duckweed yellowed. Growth slowed almost completely. Within weeks, the system collapsed. Only later did he realize the problem was not the duckweed itself. The water lacked balance. Once he rebuilt the system using cleaner water and better nutrient control, the duckweed returned stronger than before. Eventually, he began harvesting buckets every week for his flock. Stories like that are becoming increasingly common in the world of sustainable poultry farming. Farmers everywhere are experimenting with ways to grow more feed themselves instead of depending entirely on commercial suppliers. Some are combining multiple systems together. Others are designing entire backyard farm systems around renewable food production. And duckweed is often the first step because it introduces a powerful idea. Feed does not always need to come from a factory. Sometimes it can come directly from nature itself. Still, duckweed alone is not enough to completely replace commercial feed for most flocks. It works best as part of a larger poultry feed system, a supplement, a renewable layer of nutrition added into a broader feeding strategy. And that is where many farmers begin searching for the next level. Because once people realize feed can actually be grown at home, they start asking bigger questions. What if grains themselves could become more productive? What if a handful of seeds could transform into thick, living mats of green nutrition? What if chickens could harvest fresh feed grown vertically in compact spaces without needing large farmland at all? That question leads directly into the second system. And for many homesteaders, this is the moment everything changes. The fodder system. At first, the process almost seems too simple to work. A few grains are soaked in water, then spread across trays. Moisture and warmth trigger germination. Tiny roots emerge. Shoots begin rising upward. Day after day, the trays transform. What started as dry grain slowly becomes a dense mat of fresh green growth. By the seventh day, the transformation looks almost unbelievable. Bright green fodder fills the trays and thick living carpets packed with moisture, texture, and nutrients. And when these trays are placed in front of chickens, the reaction is immediate. Birds tear to the fresh greens aggressively, pulling apart roots and shoots with non-stop excitement. For many farmers, the first time they see chickens attack fresh fodder, they begin realizing something important. Chickens crave living food. The beauty of a fodder system is not just the feed itself. It is efficiency. Instead of storing grain for long periods and feeding it dry, the grain becomes activated, sprouted, expanded. transformed into a living feed source that appears far larger and fresher than the original seeds alone. And unlike traditional crops, fodder systems can grow vertically, inside sheds, greenhouses, compact racks, small barns, even simple homemade shelf systems. That makes them extremely attractive for small farm ideas and off-grid homestead setups where land may be limited. Some farmers build rotating tray systems where new grain is started every single day. One tray begins soaking while another sprouts. One grows roots while another reaches full height. By maintaining the cycle continuously, fresh feed becomes available every day of the week. And visually, the process is incredibly satisfying. Rows of bright green trays stacked vertically, water dripping slowly through roots. Chickens waiting impatiently as fresh mats are carried toward the coop. For many people, this system feels less like ordinary farming and more like building a living food machine. But despite the excitement surrounding fodder systems, there is one problem many beginners never expect: mold. And mold can destroy an entire setup faster than almost anything else. Poor airflow, excess moisture, dirty trays, or bad drainage can quickly create dangerous fungal growth. Once contamination spreads, the entire system becomes unsafe for chickens. That is why experienced homesteaders obsess over ventilation and cleanliness. Air circulation matters. Tray sanitation matters. Water control matters. Because successful regenerative agriculture depends on balance. The farmers who master these systems are not simply throwing seeds into trays and hoping for miracles. They are carefully building repeatable processes that produce reliable results day after day. And once those systems start working consistently, something incredible begins happening. Feed costs start dropping. Not overnight, not magically, but gradually, steadily, noticeably. One homesteader described the feeling as freedom. For years, every trip to the feed store felt stressful. Every price increase created anxiety. But once his homestead feed system started producing duckweed and fodder consistently, he noticed something changing. The feed bags lasted longer, then longer still, and eventually, he realized he was no longer completely dependent on them anymore. But even these systems still leave one major problem unsolved: protein. Because while greens and sprouted fodder provide valuable nutrition, chickens still require powerful protein sources to maintain strong growth and healthy egg production. And the next system may be one of the strangest solutions modern farmers are rediscovering today. An ancient floating fern that grows so aggressively some farmers now call it green gold. Azolla does not look impressive at first. Most people would walk past it without thinking twice. Floating quietly across the surface of shallow water, this tiny aquatic fern seems almost too simple to matter. But for generations, farmers in different parts of the world understood something modern agriculture nearly forgot. Azolla grows fast, very fast, and under the right conditions, it becomes one of the most fascinating natural chicken feed systems a small farmer can build. The first thing that surprises most people about Azolla farming is the color. Healthy Azolla forms thick carpets of bright green across ponds and containers, creating surfaces that almost look artificial from a distance. But beneath that simple appearance is a powerful biological relationship that allows Azolla to grow aggressively while capturing nutrients from its environment. Some homesteaders describe the first successful Azolla harvest as a turning point in how they think about poultry farming. Because once again, they realize feed does not always need to be purchased. Sometimes it can be grown continuously, using little more than sunlight, water, and proper management. And chickens respond to it immediately. Fresh harvested Azolla tossed into a flock often creates instant excitement. Birds rush toward the pile, pecking aggressively through the floating greens while competing with each other for every bite. Ducks especially seem obsessed with it, which is why many backyard farm systems combine ducks and chickens together around aquatic feed production. But what truly makes Azolla powerful is how efficiently it grows. Unlike traditional feed crops that require large areas of farmland, Azolla can produce significant biomass in compact water systems. Small ponds, line beds, and shallow tanks can all support growth when managed correctly. For off-grid homestead farmers trying to maximize production in limited spaces, that efficiency matters enormously. And because Azolla regenerates rapidly after harvesting, the system keeps producing over and over again. That is the pattern you start noticing with every successful homestead feed system. Regeneration, not constant depletion. Commercial feed disappears the moment it is poured into a feeder. Every scoop moves farther away from the next purchase. But regenerative systems behave differently. They recover, expand, multiply. The farm itself begins participating in feed production instead of relying entirely on outside supply chains. For many people entering self-sufficient farming, that realization changes everything. But just like duckweed, Azolla is not a magical solution without limitations. One of the biggest mistakes beginners make is feeding too much too quickly. Excited by rapid growth, some farmers overload their chickens with large quantities before properly balancing the flock's overall poultry nutrition. And while Azolla provides valuable nutrients, experienced farmers understand that balance matters. No smart poultry feed system relies entirely on a single ingredient. Instead, successful farmers combine systems strategically. Greens, protein, sprouted fodder, fermented feed, foraging, insects, grain supplementation. Everything works together. That is the real secret behind sustainable poultry farming. Not replacing one dependency with another, but building layers of food production that support each other naturally. One small farmer learned this lesson after trying to scale Azolla production too aggressively during a difficult season of rising feed prices. Desperate to reduce costs quickly, he pushed the system harder and harder, harvesting large amounts daily while cutting commercial feed sharply. At first, the savings looked incredible, but over time, egg production became inconsistent. Some birds lost condition. Others showed signs of nutritional imbalance. Eventually, he realized the mistake was not using Azolla itself. The mistake was assuming one system alone could do everything. Once he balanced the flock's diet properly and integrated multiple feed sources together, the chickens recovered and the farm became far more stable. That pattern appears again and again in regenerative agriculture. The strongest systems are layered systems. And that brings us to another method quietly spreading across backyard chickens communities around the world. Fermented chicken feed. At first, the idea sounds strange to many people. Intentionally soaking feed until it bubbles feels almost wrong. Some farmers reject the concept immediately because they assume fermentation means spoilage. But fermentation and rotting are not the same thing. And once people understand the difference, many begin realizing why this ancient feeding method has survived for generations. The process itself is surprisingly simple. Feed grains are submerged in water and left to ferment over time. Natural microbial activity begins transforming the mixture. Bubbles appear. The texture changes. The smell becomes sour but controlled. And during this process, something important happens inside the feed itself. The grains become more digestible. For many chickens, fermented feed feels easier to consume and process. Some farmers report reduced waste because birds eat more efficiently. Others claim healthier digestion. Some even notice improved flock energy and egg production after switching part of their feeding routine to fermented systems. But perhaps the most interesting part is how aggressively chickens react to it. The moment buckets of fermented feed appear near the coop, many flocks become intensely excited. Birds rush toward the food with almost frantic energy, pecking rapidly while fighting for position around the container. Some farmers swear their chickens prefer fermented feed over dry pellets completely. And for homesteaders trying to reduce chicken feed costs, that matters, because efficiency becomes just as important as quantity. If chickens absorb nutrients more effectively while wasting less feed overall, the economics of small farming begin shifting in powerful ways. But just like every other system in this video, fermented feed comes with mistakes that beginners often overlook. The biggest danger is poor fermentation control. Improper setups can create harmful contamination instead of healthy fermentation. Dirty containers, incorrect water ratios, extreme temperatures, or neglecting proper rotation schedules can quickly turn useful feed into something dangerous. Experienced farmers pay close attention to smell, appearance, and timing. Healthy fermented feed should smell sour but clean. Rotting feed smells foul and offensive. Understanding that difference is critical, because successful homestead systems always depend on observation. The farmers who thrive are usually the ones constantly watching, adjusting, learning, and improving. One backyard chicken owner discovered fermented feed almost by accident during a season of severe financial pressure. Feed prices had increased repeatedly, and every purchase felt heavier than the last. Out of desperation, he began researching older farming methods used before modern industrial poultry systems became dominant. That search eventually led him to fermentation. At first, he remained skeptical. The idea seemed too simple to create meaningful change. But after several weeks of careful testing, he noticed something surprising. The chickens appeared calmer during feeding. Waste around the feeders decreased. And perhaps most importantly, the expensive bags of commercial feed lasted noticeably longer than before. That was the moment he realized small efficiency improvements create massive long-term differences, especially on homesteads where every dollar matters. And that lesson extends far beyond poultry farming itself. Because at its core, self-reliance is really about reducing vulnerability. Every regenerative feed system reduces dependence slightly more. Every pond producing duckweed creates flexibility. Every tray of fodder reduces pressure. Every bucket of fermented feed stretches resources further. The farm slowly transforms from a place that consumes resources into a place that produces them. But despite everything we have covered so far, there's still one major challenge left: protein. Because no matter how efficient greens, fodder, or fermentation become, chickens still naturally crave concentrated protein sources. In nature, they constantly hunt insects, worms, larvae, and other living organisms rich in nutrients. And the final system in this video may be the most powerful answer to that instinct yet. Because unlike every other setup we have discussed so far, this one does something extraordinary. It turns waste itself into food. Not metaphorically. Literally. Kitchen scraps. Rotting vegetables. Leftover organic matter. Waste most people throw away without thinking twice. This system converts all of it into moving, living protein that chickens attack with explosive excitement. And once many farmers build this setup successfully, they begin wondering how they ever farmed without it. The black soldier fly larvae system. At first glance, the idea makes some people uncomfortable. Larvae, wriggling masses of insects feeding inside compost systems. But chickens do not care about human discomfort. The moment larvae hit the ground, instinct takes over completely. Birds sprint across the coop. Wings flap aggressively. Pecking erupts instantly as chickens compete frantically for every moving piece of protein they can grab. Because deep down, this is exactly what chickens evolved to do. Hunt, forage, search for insects. Long before commercial feed existed, chickens survived largely by chasing natural protein sources through forests, fields, and soil. Black soldier fly larvae simply recreate that instinct in an incredibly efficient modern system. And the efficiency is almost shocking. Organic scraps that would normally become waste suddenly transform into valuable poultry nutrition. Instead of paying constantly for processed protein inputs, farmers begin generating live feed directly from decomposition itself. For many small farms, this feels revolutionary. The first time some homesteaders witness larvae systems working properly, they realize something powerful. Their farm is beginning to recycle itself. Waste leaves the kitchen and enters a larvae bin. Larvae consume the scraps aggressively while multiplying rapidly. Chickens then consume the larvae. Manure returns nutrients to gardens and ponds. Plants grow stronger. More feed systems thrive. Suddenly, separate parts of the homestead begin connecting into one larger regenerative cycle. That is why so many people interested in regenerative agriculture become fascinated by black soldier fly systems. Not just because they produce protein, but because they create closed loops. And closed loops are the foundation of truly sustainable farming. One farmer described the experience as watching his property slowly come alive. Before building integrated feed systems, every process felt disconnected. Feed came from stores. Waste left the farm. Costs kept increasing. But once larvae systems, duckweed ponds, fodder trays, and compost cycles began working together, the entire property started functioning differently. The farm itself became productive in ways he had never imagined before. But like every powerful system, black soldier fly setups come with challenges too. And the biggest one is moisture control. Too much moisture creates foul conditions. Poor airflow causes odor problems. Neglected systems attract unwanted pests instead of healthy larvae production. Successful farmers manage these systems carefully. Ventilation matters. Drainage matters. Balance matters. Because regenerative systems reward attention, the people who succeed are usually the ones willing to observe nature closely instead of trying to overpower it. And once these systems stabilize, the results can feel almost unbelievable. Buckets of live protein produced from scraps. Chickens sprinting toward feed with wild excitement. Reduced waste leaving the property. Lower dependence on commercial poultry feed systems. And perhaps most importantly, a growing sense that the farm's becoming resilient. Because resilience is what this entire movement is really about. Not perfection. Not completely eliminating commercial feed overnight, but building systems strong enough to survive uncertainty. And right now, uncertainty is exactly what many small farmers are facing. Across the world, more people are beginning to realize that modern farming is entering a new era. Feed prices continue shifting unpredictably. Supply chains remain fragile. Weather patterns grow increasingly unstable. And many small farmers are starting to ask themselves a difficult question. What happens if the systems we depend on stop working the way they used to? For decades, commercial poultry farming trained people to think in straight lines. Buy feed, pour feed, repeat forever. But regenerative farmers are beginning to think differently now. Instead of relying entirely on outside inputs, they are designing farms that produce more of what they need internally. And once these systems begin connecting together, something remarkable happens. The farm stops behaving like a machine that constantly consumes resources. It starts behaving like an ecosystem. Duckweed ponds feed chickens while absorbing nutrients. Azolla multiplies across shallow water systems while producing fresh greens. Fodder trays convert grain into living mats of nutrition. Fermented feed improves efficiency and reduces waste. Black soldier fly larvae recycle scraps into concentrated protein. Manure feeds gardens. Compost strengthens soil. Water circulates through productive cycles instead of becoming waste itself. Every piece begins supporting another piece. And for many homesteaders, that transformation feels less like ordinary farming and more like rediscovering something ancient that modern agriculture almost erased. Because for most of human history, farms were not isolated systems dependent on constant industrial inputs. They were interconnected environments where waste became fuel for new production. Animals supported crops. Crops supported animals. Nutrients cycled continuously instead of being discarded. That is the deeper idea behind self-sufficient farming. Not isolation from the world, but resilience within it. The ability to absorb pressure without collapsing. And perhaps that is why so many people are suddenly becoming fascinated by backyard chickens and regenerative agriculture again. Rising costs may have started the conversation, but the deeper appeal goes beyond saving money alone. People want security. People want independence. People want to feel capable of producing food even during uncertain times. And chickens sit at the center of that dream for many families because poultry offers something uniquely powerful. Eggs, meat, compost, pest control, fertility, daily production, constant movement, and life inside the homestead itself. But feeding chickens affordably has always been one of the biggest obstacles standing in the way. That is exactly why these systems matter so much. Not because they magically eliminate all costs forever, but because they dramatically reduce dependence. And reducing dependence changes everything. One family discovered this during a difficult year, when feed prices in their area increased repeatedly within a short period of time. Every trip to the store became stressful. Every new price tag forced hard decisions about how many birds they could realistically keep. At first, they considered downsizing their flock completely, but instead, they began experimenting. A small duckweed pond behind the coop, a few fodder trays near the greenhouse, simple fermented feed buckets. Then eventually, a black soldier fly larvae set up near the compost area. None of the systems solved everything immediately. In fact, Some failed badly at first. Mold destroyed early fodder trays. Their first duckweed setup collapsed from poor water quality. The larvae had been attracted unwanted pests before they learned proper moisture control. But slowly, piece by piece, the systems improved, and eventually something changed. The feed bag started lasting longer, then much longer. The chickens grew increasingly active and engaged during feeding. The family spent more time harvesting systems from their own property and less time depending entirely on outside suppliers. And for the first time in years, they felt like they were gaining control instead of constantly losing it. That emotional shift matters more than many people realize, because homesteading is not only about production, it is also about confidence. Confidence that your land can provide, confidence that your systems can adapt, confidence that your animals can thrive even when conditions become difficult. And perhaps the most fascinating part of all this is that chickens themselves often seem happier when allowed to interact with more natural feed systems. Watch a flock attack live larvae, and the energy becomes impossible to ignore. Observe chickens tearing through fresh fodder mats, and you immediately notice the excitement. Toss fresh duckweed or Azolla into the coop, and the birds rush forward with intense curiosity. These are not passive feeding responses. They are instinctive behaviors. Because deep inside, chickens were never designed to stand motionless beside industrial feeders every day of their lives. They evolved to search, scratch, chase, peck, hunt, and forage constantly. Natural chicken feed systems reactivate those instincts. And for many small farmers, that feels important. The goal is not simply producing eggs as cheaply as possible. The goal is building healthier, more resilient backyard farm systems where animals behave more naturally while the farm itself becomes increasingly productive. That idea is driving a massive wave of interest in sustainable poultry farming right now. People everywhere are searching for better systems, smarter systems, systems capable of surviving future uncertainty while producing healthier food at the same time. And the truth is, no single system will work perfectly for everyone. Some climates favor duckweed farming more than others. Some homesteads have space for larger fodder systems, while others rely heavily on fermentation or insects. Every farm must adapt according to its own conditions, resources, and goals. But the larger lesson remains the same. The future belongs to layered systems. The farmers who thrive long-term are often the ones building multiple overlapping forms of resilience instead of depending entirely on one fragile input. That applies far beyond poultry alone. Gardens, water systems, energy production, food storage, livestock integration. Everything becomes stronger when interconnected properly. And chickens may be one of the easiest places for many people to begin, because once you start observing how quickly regenerative systems can reduce waste while increasing productivity, it becomes difficult to ignore the possibilities. One duckweed pond leads to another. One fodder rack expands into a larger growing system. Compost becomes larvae production. Rainwater becomes nutrient cycling. The homestead slowly transforms into something alive, something adaptive, something resilient. And perhaps that is why so many experienced homesteaders speak about these systems with almost contagious excitement. To outsiders, they may simply look like ponds, trays, buckets, and insects. But to the people building them, they represent freedom from constant dependency. Not total independence, but meaningful independence. Enough to reduce pressure. Enough to create flexibility. Enough to survive difficult seasons without panic. And in a world where uncertainty seems to grow every year, that kind of resilience becomes incredibly valuable, especially for small farmers. Because small farms rarely survive by competing with giant industrial operations directly. They survive by becoming smarter, more adaptive, more efficient, more regenerative. Large industrial systems often depend on endless external inputs, endless grain, endless transportation, endless fuel, endless supply chains. But regenerative homesteads work differently. They recycle, reuse, recover, rebuild. That difference may become one of the defining agricultural shifts of the future. Already, younger generations of farmers are beginning to rethink how poultry systems operate. Many no longer want fully industrialized approaches disconnected from nature completely. Instead, they are searching for integrated systems that combine modern efficiency with natural cycles. And honestly, the timing makes sense. People are tired of feeling dependent on systems they cannot control. They want to participate in production again. They want to understand where food comes from. They want farms that function more like living ecosystems and less like fragile factories. That does not mean commercial feed disappears completely. For many poultry keepers, commercial feed will still remain part of the equation. But the difference is that regenerative farmers no longer want it to be the only equation. They want options, backup systems, flexibility. And that is exactly what these four systems provide. Duckweed creates renewable green nutrition from water surfaces. Fodder systems transform small amounts of grain into thick living feed. Azolla farming adds fast-growing aquatic nutrition, capable of regenerating continuously. Fermented chicken feed increases efficiency while improving digestibility. And black soldier fly larvae convert waste itself into concentrated protein. Separately, each system helps. Together, they become something much larger. A regenerative poultry feed network capable of dramatically reducing dependency on outside inputs. And for many people, that possibility feels empowering in a way modern industrial systems rarely do. Because instead of constantly reacting to rising costs, farms begin creating solutions directly on their own land. That shift changes the entire psychology of farming. Suddenly, every pond becomes potential feed production. Every food scrap becomes potential protein. Every tray becomes possible nutrition. The farm itself starts generating abundance instead of merely consuming resources endlessly. And abundance changes how people think. It reduces fear. It creates stability. It creates confidence. One experienced homesteader once explained it perfectly after years of experimenting with backyard chickens and integrated feed systems. He said the goal was never eliminating all challenges completely. The goal was making sure one problem could never destroy everything. If feed prices rise, the ponds still produce greens. If grain becomes expensive, larvae systems still create protein. If drought affects gardens, fermentation still stretches existing resources further. Layered systems absorb shocks better. That is resilience. And resilience may become the single most important farming skill of the future. Because the reality is simple. The old model of total dependency is becoming increasingly unstable for many small farmers. The farmers who survive long-term may not be the ones spending the most money. They may be the ones learning how to build systems that regenerate themselves. Systems that recycle nutrients naturally. Systems that turn waste into productivity. Systems that work with nature instead of constantly fighting against it. And perhaps most importantly, systems that continue producing even during difficult times. That is the deeper lesson hidden behind all four of these feed setups. This is not really just about chicken feed. It is about freedom. Freedom from complete dependency. Freedom from constant vulnerability. Freedom to build something more sustainable for the future. And for many people watching this right now, that future may already be starting in a backyard coop, a small pond, or a simple tray of sprouting grain. Because every resilient homestead begins the same way. One system at a time. One experiment at a time. One lesson at a time. And eventually, those small systems become something much larger than anyone expected, a farm capable of feeding itself. If you enjoyed this video and want more deep dive farming systems, self-sufficient homestead strategies, backyard chicken secrets, regenerative agriculture ideas, and practical ways to reduce feed costs naturally, subscribe to Herd and Harvest right now. This channel is for people who want smarter farming, stronger homesteads, and real self-reliance in an uncertain world. And trust me, the next farming revolution is not happening inside giant factories. It is happening quietly in backyards, small farms, ponds, gardens, and homesteads built by people willing to think differently. So subscribe to Herd and Harvest, turn on notifications, and join a growing community of farmers building systems designed not just to survive the future, but to thrive in it.